Alright, for today's critical thought, we're returning to the topic of designing an effective control scheme for your game. And in the past, we've talked about many different options of this, from the understanding of primary versus secondary actions, how your button layout can affect things, and more. But we're going to focus on when a control or when a game feels finicky or doesn't feel right or fine-tuned. And this is one of those very simple things that can add up to major issues, especially when we're talking about action or player skill based titles. Now, over the last few years, we have certainly seen and sampled many 2D and 3D platformers from the indie and AAA space. From the indie side, we have seen games like Super Meat Boy, The End Is Nigh, Aquaria, even in terms of 2D but with swimming. And again, there's so many more, my brain tends to completely fizzle out trying to remember them all. But one of the things that I've found is that there have been some cases where it feels hard to control the game. And it kind of feels like you're not in 100% control of your player. In past critical thoughts, we've talked about the importance of a one-to-one relation in terms of action to button press. What that means is, if I can turn this just right, when I move my analog stick or press a button, the character immediately responds. Essentially, I perform an action on the controller, the character immediately performs the same action. Now, when we talked about this last, we brought up keyboard and mouse versus a gamepad. And typically, the keyboard is used as the one-to-one because of the fact that keys only have an on-off notification. I push the key, something happens. I take the key off, the game responds in kind. But when it comes to action titles, especially those that are built heavily on movement or player skill agility, getting that one-to-one relationship is very important and can mean the difference between a game feeling right in the player's hands and when it just feels off. And I have played a lot of games, especially from the independent side, that have definitely fallen on the finicky side. Whether it be a pure platformer, or even games that are built on isometric movement, similar to Diablo, Grim Dawn, and the like. But, in the end of the day, if you're trying to get the player to feel like they're in complete control of their character, a one-to-one relation with movement and jumping is very key. Now, jumping in of itself is a major action and one we could spend a good 10 to 15 minutes on easily. But for today's talk, in terms of one-to-one, what that simply means is when I press the A button or X or whatever your jump key is, the character should respond immediately. A lot of older action-based games would basically give like a delay. Like you'll see your character kind of like kneel down and then jump. But if you're trying to make the player feel like they're in complete control, it has to be instant. Now, another major part that has definitely been the basis for today's critical thought is motion. In a lot of really fine-tuned action games, the movement is immediate and it is one-to-one to the player. Super Meat Boy is a really great example of this. When I'm playing Super Meat Boy, it is a very technically required game in terms of movement and speed, but I have 100% control over Meat Boy. However I am moving my analog stick and holding down the run button immediately affects his velocity and trajectory. You can see the difference in this in a game like The End Is Nigh, which it removed the ability for the player to walk and run and just gave one default motion. And what happens is as you're jumping, the momentum of your character is automatic. And that is very dangerous to have in control precise games. Any kind of automatic or motions that take away from the player's control. An example that I like to go back to is Valda's Story, Abyss Odyssey, I think that's what it was called. This was a 2D platformer / ARPG. And in the game, you have a lot of special abilities that are designed to make the character like dash, whether it's forward, in the air, and stuff like that. And due to how packed or button or command heavy the various buttons were, it was very easy for the wrong command to go off when you wanted to, such as trying to move very carefully and accidentally triggering your dash. And in games where things feel very finicky, it's when the player loses control. And another example that I ran into would be something like Guiana's Sisters, which was that game we did a spotlight of on a Saturday Night Grab Bag. In that one, you are constantly having to keep dashing and bouncing off of enemies, but once you begin that dash, you don't really have 100% control of your character anymore. Another really good example would be when we did the first look at Mystic Melee. This was a game that's built on speedrun and platforming, and what they did was, while you're on the ground, you have 100% motion of your character, again, one-to-one with your gamepad or keyboard. However, once you jump, and if you have any forward momentum while you're in the air, the game will move your character automatically. And that is very dangerous, because when you're trying to land on block-wide platforms, the fact that the character is moving already means that instead of you having the easy to understand reaction of a one-to-one motion, I have to basically adjust myself in midair, which isn't that natural and it's a lot harder to do. This is why for a lot of older school games, despite featuring committed jumping, as in I leap into the air and then I have no other control over my character until they land back down, it still feels precise because I know when I do that jump the exact distance I'm going to make, and the jump is still in my control. Imagine if instead, while I'm jumping, there's a delay that's going to control it. Or when I'm moving around, if I attack, my character automatically jumps. And this is kind of the main point when it comes to cumbersome or finicky control schemes. That whenever you take control away from the player, be it through an automated action, or when again things are button heavy, it makes the controls feel worse than they are. I remember Dust Force, especially on the keyboard, felt very tricky to play, although I'm sure there are experts who've done it. But when I switched from the keyboard to the gamepad, it was a lot easier. And that was another major part about those kinds of finicky controls. A thumb pad only requires one finger to perform 4 different motions. A keyboard, however, requires 4 fingers to perform the same action. And when you start throwing so many buttons at the player, it becomes a lot harder to process the action, and again can lead to the control scheme feeling weird or just not right in the player's hands. Now, with that said, though, this is going to be a quicker critical thought because there's a lot we can segue into. And if you guys have a particular topic regarding control schemes, UI design, or even simply just gamepad functionality here, please let me know in the comments below. But to wrap things up, good controls when it comes to game design have to give the player as much control or sense of control as they can. You can have automated actions or homing abilities, but the player has to be the one to actually trigger it. Whenever you take things away from the player's hands, it becomes a lot harder to associate the action to the response. Going back to Mystic Melee, the fact that I have to adjust myself while I'm in the air instead of just having just be 100% on my control makes it a lot harder to compartmentalize that action. Whereas in a game like Super Meat Boy, everything is immediate and one-to-one. Super Meat Boy does not move or do anything without my input. And that is a major part of why that game felt so responsive. And even when you have characters who have like a certain heft or weight to them, such as the 3D Mario games or even the 2D ones as well, it still works because the second I stop pushing the gamepad, Mario stops. There's no delay. When I'm jumping, he will only move as much forward as I'm holding the control pad or the analog stick. Now, with that said, though, for those of you watching this, especially game developers who have worked on 2D or 3D action-based titles, What do you feel is an effective way of giving the player control? Do you like that immediate one-to-one? And are there cases where you feel that taking control away from the player can lead to a more effective control scheme? Such as, we could even use examples of games that instead of having the player control the direction they dash or dodge, just pressing the dodge button automatically orients the character to where you want it to go. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And until our next video, have a good night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. For my writings as well as weekly podcasts, check out game-wisdom.com. For ways of supporting Game Wisdom and get access to rewards such as VIP status, as well as voting for the Saturday Night Grab Bag, check out patreon.com/gwbycer. You can follow me on Twitter at gwbycer for my daily thoughts as well as updates as to what's going on. So thanks again for watching, and be sure to check out our next video coming real soon to the channel.